Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, the pattern as we look forward over the next 2 to 4 weeks has really kind of got me chasing my tail a little bit. So I thought it'd be best just to go back and see where this pattern evolved from so we can maybe better understand where it's going. So you've been looking here at a map that shows from September 1st all the way until the 7th of October what the 500 millibar height anomalies have looked like. And basically we've had 3 very large ridges. There's one here, there's a second one that's been sitting right in through here, and a third one south of Greenland. And we would call this a very blocky type pattern. It's a slow pattern. It's a pattern that's not progressing. It's full of very large, blocking ridges. And as a result, we've robbed momentum, or we've seen the momentum really slow down in the Pacific, and it's really allowed the pattern to kind of get stuck and configured in a certain way. And I'm going to explain to you what that means in a few seconds. Another way to look at it is just to look at how anomalous the winds are. So not just the heights, but the winds. What you see is coming around this ridge, they're like this. They're coming around this ridge, we've seen flow like that. And around this ridge, the flow's been like this. Now, the major issue with flow like this, these 3 ridges setting up, is that for much of the central part of the United States, really from the eastern Corn Belt clear to the Rocky Mountains, and then again over here in the west, this is a setup that's mild and it is very, very dry. So big questions we're going to be asking. Will the cutoff lows that have been sitting here move? Will these ridges start to move? When will we see the harvest windows tighten up and close? And as we watch this pattern evolve into what appears to be a form of a Rex block over the western United States, what does that mean in terms of delivering cold air east and keeping the warmer air to the west? So let's dig into those questions. First of all, just a bit of a recap here. Over that same time period, now this is September 1st to October 9th, so yesterday morning, we can see that the preference of the atmosphere pulling that larger ridge into place here has kept much of the western United States quite warm. Everywhere that there's a number 1 means over the last 40 days here we've had the warmest such time period going back 130 years. Meanwhile, you get east of the Mississippi River, we've favored more frequent and longer duration shots of colder air, especially when you get into parts of the Carolinas, Virginia, right on the top of the Appalachian Mountains. And this is an area that needed more heat to get the crop to finish. Now, I know we've seen the disparity in the temperatures, but what's been discussed a whole lot more is the changes in precipitation patterns. So with that large ridge spinning like this, we have eliminated the frequent return of Gulf moisture into the midsection of the country. Okay, so the flow is just dominated like this. It's come out of the north, and as a result, it's been extremely dry. Many places in here over the last 40 days in the midsection of the country are having near record dryness. Now, it's been wet in the southwest, and that system earlier in September that came out of California went to Montana, that delivered a lot of precip. The rainfall that you see here is primarily from Ian, but also remember we've had a couple of systems pass through New England. It's been very dry in the Pacific Northwest as well. Now, when we look at the soil moisture values, we see here that down to 16 inches or 40 centimeters, NASA's data really suggests some extremely dry soil in this particular area. But I'll tell you, I had to have my sewer line dug out today, and I watched them dig down about 5 feet. I live right over here, and the soil moisture values, once you're down there past the top 1.5 feet, were still quite high in east central Illinois. That's just one example that I could provide some visual evidence for today. But you do see that the topsoil here is extremely dry. Now, when we look at it in another way, this is the last 2 weeks worth of precipitation anomalies. Percent of normal is what's shown here going through Sunday morning. Outside of Ian and some wetter weather throughout the Rocky Mountains, things have been just bone dry. This deepest shade of red again represents where really most places have measured almost no precipitation. Over the weekend, there was some heavy rain that came out of New Mexico into Texas and Oklahoma. And then a little bit of rain that kind of skirted right in through here in the central part of the United States. But outside of that, much of the rest of the country was very dry. In fact, today they just added this in this afternoon's all hazards weather report update. We got some stronger winds coming in here into parts of the plains, and they just issued an area here in parts of Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado that does have a red flag warning out for this region. And we also see down here we have a flood advisory still in place for parts of western and southwestern Texas and then New Mexico. And this area right over here is called out by the National Weather Service of having risk of field fires. So this has kind of been the mainstay of this. But when we look back at the last 2 weeks and then put that into the longer statistical analysis here of how dry things are. I just want to show you a graphic I put in my morning report. It's from the Vicksburg, Mississippi river gauge from the USGS. And the water levels have come down from about 35 feet back in June all the way down to about 3 to 4 feet right now where this particular gauge is located. Just a reminder, this gauge is not in the middle of the river, but it is just showing you the changes we've seen there because things have gotten so dry. And of course, we've heard a lot in the news about the reduction in barge traffic because of this. Okay, these are the results. We talked about the possible impact. Now I want to just know what could cause things to change. And you know that I'm very big on trying to assess the strength and position of the Pacific jet. It's the upwind, feature that drives weather across the United States and Canadian prairie. And as a result of that, I want to know if anything's affecting it, like La Niña or the MJO or something happening over Asia. And what we see here, again, looking at this Pacific jet extension graphic. So extensions here, retracted is there, poleward shift here, equatorward shift is there, is that the models did a kind of a bad job at picking up on the pattern of the jet stream as of late. Now, they're currently forecasting it to come out of a retraction, an equatorward retraction, and move toward a more poleward and extended shift. And if it would do that, that would really start to progress the pattern across the North America, get rid of these big blocking features if we extend the jet. But we have to ask, is that going to happen? So the way to look at this is just to look at this graphic here. This is the European Ensemble 12Z data, so just released here about an hour ago. And what it's looking at is the jet stream level winds just in the northern hemisphere. Now, as we play this through this week out to Wednesday and Thursday, the forecast remains with a large ridge over the western United States. That allows systems to kind of roll over the top, and they dive here into the Great Lakes, delivering multiple shots at colder air. We also can see there's a bit of a Rex block here. There's actually a low that's to the south that's going to form over California, and that high over low pattern is often called a Rex block. So here's what I want you to watch with me. We need to see if the model continues to build this or if it starts to cause it to fade in a meaningful way. And what I mean by meaningful is that not due to model spread, but due to an actual signal. So as we play out here through Saturday into Sunday, we actually see during that time the Rex block even gets larger. And then as we go into early next week, we see once again into next Wednesday and Thursday, another large ridge pulls in. So we have 10 days of more ridging events across the west. And then we ask, well, what about beyond that? Day 11, 12, 13. Is there any reason to believe the model is going to actually extend the jet, punching through the ridge that is here in the, running up toward Alaska and over the northwest, getting rid of the cutoff low that's been between Hawaii in this extension of the jet, and get rid of it and just plow on through? That's what I want to know. And I'm going to tell you, even beyond about 10 days, the model spread is very large, and therefore we have to ask ourselves, what other meteorological evidence is there to kind of assess this? So let's play that game. First of all, this is what the next 15 days looks like if that pattern stays in place. In fact, most of this is really dominated by the 10-day precipitation outlook, and that's what you're looking at now. We have two systems that bring precip through parts of the Midwest into the east and New England. We then have this low that kind of sits off the coast here, helping to deliver moisture to the southwest, and then flows trying to come in like this, which is why we see this whole area showing up wetter. But generally speaking, the upper level jet stream flow is doing something like that. Now, what we understand about a flow pattern like this is we tend to produce a lot of upper level convergence, repeated shots at higher pressure coming through here, and that's why it's drier. And then you also see that the reason why the northwest through California is drier is because the jet stream is just avoiding it, nothing to push the moisture in there. Now, given that, I want to show you this. Now, you hear me talk about the patterns all over the world, really, and one of the patterns I want to discuss with you today is called the Pacific North American Oscillation, or the PNA. Now, when its values are positive, like you see here, which they're going to be all the way out to possibly the 20th, all right, that's when there is a ridge over the Pacific Northwest, like I just drew. But if it dips negative, that means there's troughing there. Now, you look at this and go, wow, look, it's going to go from positive into negative, but I want to remind you of something. What you see in the kind of the box and whisker chart here is that the spread of this is enormous. I mean, it's like from a -6 to a +5. And as a result, I I think that what we're going to have to pay attention to is if we unlodge the ridge that's in Alaska that pulls into the Pacific Northwest and then the cutoff low south of it, if we can just get the whole thing to progress, then we could redevelop a pattern that delivers more precipitation to the west. So I want to know if that's possible. We're going to start with the big teleconnection, La Niña. It's been in every video that I've had for the last 2 years. You can see that the La Niña continues to strengthen. We have very strong trade winds in this area. In fact, let me show them to you. See them right here? And for at least the next 10 days, they continue to really, really push hard. There are westerly wind bursts coming out of the Indian Ocean right in here. You've seen me draw that a lot. But what I want to draw on the graph today, though, is a line between the two and show you that as we get out here toward October 20th through the 25th, the westerly winds are starting to push a little bit farther over in this direction. And the easterly winds associated with La Niña are not as strong. So where that leaves us is with a progression in the MJO. And let me show you what that could do. If the MJO, like the models are suggesting, now comes out of phase 5 and goes into phase 6 and 7, okay, and stays somewhere in here, this is going to affect the Pacific jet. Now, I was very wrong in my previous forecast videos thinking that it would curl back around into phase 5. It's clearly not doing that. The models are no longer showing that. So what does an MJO in phase 6 and 7 do? Well, looking historically in the near term, more ridging in the northwest, troughing over the east. Phase 7, more ridging just off the coast, troughing in the east. That's what we've already seen forecast. But the question that I've got is, do we start to break the likelihood of this ridge down once we get past the 20th, out there maybe like the 24th or the 25th? Because the latest model data looking at the time period of October 20th to November 20th surprised me a bit today. I thought the model would kick the can down the road a bit farther, keeping the ridges around over the west, and now you can clearly see they don't. There's actually much above average precipitation throughout the west, showing up at the end of the month of October and the first 20 days of November. This also brings more frequent systems across much of the United States and possibly into the Ohio and Tennessee Valley. And that is a very normal La Niña early winter, late fall signal. I didn't think it would look like that. I thought we'd see a longer duration of what we're currently in, but apparently the models want to break it down at the end of the month of October. All right, so what does all that mean? Well, I went and I looked up what it takes to have such a wet November in the west. And it's pretty simple. You can't have a ridge here. In fact, you've got to have a trough of low pressure spinning right in through this area such that the flow just comes screaming in. And again, this just sets up, look at this ridge that sits, or this other trough that sits right over here. This just sets us up with a very active pattern across the United States. So if this particular feature evolves, we need to see it showing up in the model. So let's look at the long range forecast. Now this is out to day 10 when the ridge is still there. But as we go forward, do you see how the model is attempting by the end of October, there it is, beginning of November. See the blues? Let's just go back there right here. And then even going into the beginning of November, trying to just get rid of flow that does this, and instead it has flow that does that. In fact, it really starts to show up again at the end of October. Now you can really see it. And so that's one of the reasons why the models are showing up wetter. They're attempting to give us that setup where historically it's been very wet in the month of November through the west. Here's some of the years that I used for this analog approach. And in order for that to occur, and by the way, the CFSV2 sees it as well. You see, here's the last week of October. See how it's bringing in wetter conditions there? And even the first week of November, trying to be wetter in the northwest. Well, in order for that to occur, we cannot have the strong trade winds sitting here. You see, what I've got for you is those same Novembers. In those cases, the trade winds let go for a little while. They actually took on a westerly component, and the strongest trade stayed over here in the central, almost the eastern side of the Pacific. Now, if that occurs, this sits right on top of MJO Phase 1. And MJO Phase 1 being right over here, because remember it goes 5, 6, 7, 8, 1. That historically means we have troughs in that area. So let me tell you what has to happen. We've got to break down the ridge that's over the Pacific Northwest. We need to develop a trough underneath this arrow is. We need the Pacific jet to extend and the trade winds to let go. That's like 5 different things that are not happening right now, or 4 different things happening right now that I'm saying in order for the map to verify it needs to happen. So I'm going to sit here and watch it, because at this point, like I told you at the beginning, I feel like I'm chasing my tail, coming back again to the thing I started with. So we'll keep an eye on this, all right? Now, something else new was just released for the long range. You know that we've been talking about, We've been talking about the end of La Niña at some point at the beginning of the new year. That's been a constant in several of my videos. Well, we saw the new data come out from the NMME, and I want to use this to complement what I showed you last week from the European model. Let's just jump out there into season 1 precipitation rate. Now, right now for November, December, January, the National Multi-Model Ensemble is following the European with wetter conditions in those areas, drier to the south of that line where there's still no strong subtropical jet being formed. What about going out there to December, January, February? They just keep it around. This is as La Niña of a forecast as I can show you. I mean, that's exactly what La Niña winter precipitation looks like overall. Let's go forward, though, another season and take a look at now January, February, March. What will be very important to watch is if, in addition to a polar jet being here, if we can finally just get rid of the lack of a subtropical jet and start to bring it in. The European model wanted to do that. The NMME does not at this point. So I just wanted to compare and contrast the models and let you know that during this time period, January, February, March, and then into spring, the European model does not carry the same dry signal that you see here from California to Texas to the Carolinas. It is wetter. So we're going to watch that all evolve, and what it will really kind of be predicated on is whether or not, there we go, this is going to actually fade and let a subtropical jet form. All right, that was a lot of information about the long range. Let's actually now come back to the near term. We have got 2 shots at cold air and dry air coming out of the Canadian prairie. This is a map of dew point temperature. So again, we're looking here at how much moisture is in the air. And what you're going to see is going through Tuesday, 2 things are going to happen. 1, we're going to finally open up the Gulf to transport a decent amount of moisture pretty far to the north. There'll be a front on Tuesday night coming through this area. And it appears that after it passes through in the late evening hours, we have the chance for some stronger storms in parts of the Midwest. But the air that's coming in behind this is dry, very dry. That's Wednesday into Thursday and Friday. So dew point temperatures here could be down in the teens in parts of Iowa. That's how dry this is going to be. Well, that dry air moves on through, and then by Saturday, look at the second reinforcing shot at dry air that comes in. So we're limiting the return of Gulf moisture a lot over the next 10 days. You say, why? The flow is doing something like this. So as that front comes through, just want to point out here, tomorrow on Tuesday, there is a large area that the Storm Prediction Center is keeping an eye out on for the potential for some stronger storms. And then on Wednesday, it really kind of seems to be centered over the Ohio River Valley, this area right in through here. If we go look at it with the high-res NAM model, you're going to see that overnight tonight, getting into early Tuesday morning, we're going to see some of the moisture pushing out of Oklahoma through Missouri into like St. Louis and into central and southern Illinois. That'll then move likely into Indiana. This is really quite limited on the precip. But by 6 p.m. Tuesday, here's the main cold front. And what's interesting about where this cold front is we actually get a leading band of showers and storms in the overnight hours on Tuesday, and then a post-frontal band that comes in right in through there. So where does that go? Well, this is now Wednesday morning, Wednesday midday, getting toward Wednesday evening. Now you can see the deeper trough wrapping up by Wednesday evening where the storms could line up right in through here. This is going to be probably a very narrow band of storms as it comes through, but that's overall what we're looking at. Let's pick that up with the European model at that same point, Wednesday night right here. Now, on Wednesday night, you also notice that we were increasing the precipitation chances out of in the southeast. Some of this moisture is actually coming from the remnants of a tropical system down here in the Bay of Campeche. But then as you go through Thursday morning, it hits the Carolinas into New England. This is now getting into Thursday afternoon and evening, heavy rain into parts of New England. And then as we go into Friday midday, Friday evening, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon and evening, you'll see finally by Sunday morning, there it is, the next front's coming through. And as that front comes through here, big dome of high pressure behind it, another round of cold, dry air. Yes, there is the chance for some snow in parts of the upper Midwest, Manitoba and Ontario out of this, but that gets us all the way out to next Monday. Total precipitation during that time, I like the European model solution on this. Let's just play this out through the weekend here and park it there on next Monday morning or next Monday afternoon. So you can see there will be some rain coming through here over the next couple days. It could kind of slow harvest in parts of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. And then another band coming down here farther to the south with the first front and then the second front. So overall, when we say how much rain could we get out of this, this map shows you the probability of getting at least an inch of rain over the next 10 days. We can look at the inverse of this, or the opposite of this, if you will, and say, well, what is the probability of getting less than half of an inch? And now we see that where that dry air intrudes, it's really hammering parts of the western plains, the western Corn Belt, the northwestern plains, getting all the way up into the Canadian Prairie, and of course the west. Now, remember, out there at day 10, we are still calling into question if this really stays put. And take a look. This is October 20th going into that 23rd, 24th, 25th time period. See what showed up? Now, in previous model runs, this wasn't here. This is the number one thing to be watching for. Can we, at the end of the month, see the jet stream getting rid of the big ridge, responding to the progression of the MJO, which is ultimately being caused by behavior in the trade winds from La Niña? If that occurs, the new week 2 precipitation outlook is now no longer dry for the Pacific Northwest. And we have a better chance at seeing the pattern progress, meaning that harvest windows will stay open through the third week of October here after these next two fronts come through. But other than that, we might see a much different end of October, start of November. Okay, what else is happening around the world? South America, let's get an update on this, is very, very dry, both north and south of this front. So the front's parked here from Santa Catarina through parts of Paraná, Mato Grosso do Sul. It comes into Bolivia and brings decent rain to this side of Mato Grosso. But in the interior here of the central and eastern growing areas, it's showing up dry. And to the south of that front, very dry in Rio Grande do Sul, along the Paraná River and through Argentina, where we know there is ongoing drought stress. The new long-range models just kick that can down the road. I know I've used that phrase a lot, but they're not letting go of this pattern. Stays wetter to the north and drier in the areas where we're already concerned about significant drought issues. This will allow for a continuation of faster planting. And we saw released on Friday that in Mato Grosso, they're currently at 18.61% on planting. They slowed down a little bit. Last year, they were 20.31%, but the 5-year average is 10.86%. This forecast, if verifies, will continue to allow for a fast plant through the month of November. Whereas we're going to see substantial issues in southern Brazil, parts of southern Brazil, down near Rio Grande do Sul into Argentina with drought. So we've got a lot to keep watching, and I'll do that for you and report back to you again later this week. Have a good one. Thanks.